For my 30th birthday, they gave me divorce papers to humiliate me. They didn't realize I had already taken everything they owned. Before the story begins, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and comment here. For roll call. The restaurant, a hushed temple of modern gastronomy named Aurelia, was the kind of place where conversations were murmured and laughter was a quiet, restrained affair. Gilt-edged plates sat on starched white linen, and a single perfect orchid stood sentinel in a crystal vase at the center of their table. It was, by all accounts, the perfect setting for a 30th birthday celebration. For Evelyn Reed, it felt like the perfect setting for a meticulously orchestrated execution. Her husband, Marcus Hamilton, sat to her left, his handsome face illuminated by the soft glow of the candlelight. He hadn't looked her in the eye all evening, preferring to study his phone or the intricate patterns on the ceiling. Opposite him, his mother, Catherine Hamilton, presided over the table like a queen holding court. Her silver hair was coiled into a flawless chignon, and the diamonds at her throat glittered like chips of ice. They were cold, beautiful, and impossibly hard. "Well," Catherine began, her voice cutting through the gentle clinking of silverware. She raised her champagne flute, the pale gold liquid shimmering within. "A toast to Evelyn on her 30th birthday. A significant milestone indeed. The age a woman finally understands her place in the world." The words were honey-laced arsenic. Evelyn offered a small, practiced smile, the kind she had perfected over 5 years of marriage. It was a smile that conceded nothing. Marcus raised his glass, his eyes still avoiding hers. "To Evelyn," he mumbled, the words feeling like an afterthought. They drank. The champagne was crisp and expensive, but it tasted like ash in Evelyn's mouth. She set her glass down with a delicate, near-silent click. "And now for your gift," Catherine continued, a predatory gleam in her eyes. She reached for a sleek, leather portfolio that had been resting by her chair. It wasn't wrapped. There was no bow, no pretense of celebration. She slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped inches from Evelyn's plate. "We felt at this juncture it was time for a change. A renewal of sorts," Catherine said, her smile widening. "We believe this is for the best. For the family." Evelyn looked at the portfolio. She didn't need to open it. She had been expecting it for months, had seen the signs in the private meetings between Marcus and his mother, the sudden chill in their interactions, the way they spoke of the future as if she were no longer a part of it. They thought she was oblivious, a decorative doll they could eventually put back in its box. "Open it, darling," Marcus urged, a strange, nervous energy about him. He had his phone out, resting on his lap but angled up toward her. The small red light of the recording function was blinking. He was filming her, waiting for the tears, the outburst, the predictable drama that would affirm their narrative of her as an unstable, emotional woman. It was for their entertainment. Slowly, Evelyn reached out and opened the portfolio. Inside, on heavy cream-colored paper, were the words she expected to see. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Below were the signature lines, one for Marcus Hamilton, already filled in with his arrogant, looping script, and one for her. The silence at the table was thick with anticipation. Catherine leaned forward, her expression a mask of feigned sympathy. Marcus's thumb hovered over his phone screen. Evelyn read the top page, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up, not at Marcus, but directly into Catherine's triumphant gaze. "Thank you, Catherine," she said, her voice even and clear. It didn't tremble. It didn't break. "This is a very thoughtful gift." She reached into her small, elegant clutch and retrieved a pen, a beautiful fountain pen with a silver nib that Marcus had given her for their first anniversary. He'd told her it was for writing grocery lists. With a steady hand, she signed her name on the line, Evelyn Reed. She didn't even sign with his last name. It was a small act of defiance, the first of many. She closed the portfolio and slid it back across the table to Catherine. "There," she said, her voice now carrying a note of finality. "All taken care of." She dabbed her lips with her napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. Then she stood up, her movements fluid and graceful. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, the patrons at nearby tables stealing glances, sensing the tectonic shift in the room's atmosphere. Catherine's smile had vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This wasn't the reaction she had prepared for. Marcus lowered his phone, his mouth slightly agape. "Enjoy the rest of your meal," Evelyn said to the table at large. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel their stunned, bewildered stares on her back as she pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool night air of the city. The carefully constructed cage had just been shattered, but it was she, not them, who held the key. The taxi ride to the Hamilton estate in Greenwich was a silent, 20-minute journey through winding, tree-lined roads. The homes grew larger, the gates taller, until the cab pulled up to the imposing wrought-iron entrance that separated the Hamiltons from the rest of the world. Evelyn paid the driver and stepped out, the familiar crunch of gravel under her feet sounding alien, like the soundtrack to someone else's life. The mansion was ablaze with light, a beacon of sterile wealth against the dark, starless sky. She let herself in with her key, the heavy oak door swinging open into a cavernous 2-story foyer. A massive crystal chandelier, a source of Catherine's immense pride, hung from the ceiling, casting cold, fractured light on the marble floors below. The air inside was still and cold, carrying the faint, cloying scent of lilies, Catherine's favorite. For 5 years, this house had been her home. Or rather, it had been the place she lived. It had never truly felt like hers. Every painting on the wall, every sculpture in its alcove, every carefully chosen piece of furniture had been selected by Catherine to reflect the Hamilton legacy. Evelyn was just another acquisition, chosen to fill a role, the beautiful, intelligent, well-bred wife for the Hamilton heir. She walked past the grand living room, a space so formal and untouched it resembled a museum exhibit. She remembered the day she had suggested adding a comfortable reading chair to a corner by the fireplace. Catherine had looked at her with utter disdain. "My dear," she had said, "this is a formal space. We do not get comfortable in here." Her gaze drifted to Marcus's study, the door slightly ajar. Inside she could see the chaos of his desk, piles of papers he never read, reports he claimed as his own. So many of those reports, the detailed market analyses and investment strategies that had bolstered the Hamilton Corp portfolio, had been written by her, late at night, after Marcus had gone to bed complaining of a headache from a long day of lunches and golf. He would skim her work in the morning, memorize a few key phrases, and present it as his own in board meetings. They had all let him. They had all seen her as nothing more than his brilliant, unpaid assistant. A wave of something, not sadness but a cold, clarifying anger, washed over her. They had not just underestimated her. They had erased her. She ascended the sweeping main staircase, her hand gliding over the polished banister. Her steps were silent on the thick Persian runner. She bypassed the master suite she had shared with Marcus, a room that had grown colder and larger with each passing year. Instead, she walked to the end of the hall, to a guest bedroom that she had quietly claimed as her own personal space. Inside, everything was neat, orderly, and anonymous, except for the large walk-in closet. She opened the door. Pushed to the back, behind the designer gowns and expensive shoes the Hamiltons expected her to wear, was a single, sleek, black suitcase. It was fully packed. It had been for 6 months. She pulled it out. It rolled smoothly and silently across the hardwood floor. Inside was everything she needed. A curated selection of clothes, a new laptop and burner phone, copies of her personal documents, and a hard drive containing every piece of evidence she would need. She took one last look around the room. There was nothing here she wanted to take, not a single photograph, not a single piece of jewelry that hadn't been a gift meant to remind her of her place. Her life in this house had been a performance, and the show was now over. She walked back down the grand staircase, her suitcase gliding behind her. As she reached the foyer, she paused by a small, ornate table. On it sat a framed photo of her and Marcus on their wedding day. They both looked happy, or at least like a perfect imitation of it. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, she picked up the frame, turned it face down, and left it there on the table. She opened the front door, stepped outside, and pulled it shut behind her. The heavy thud of the lock engaging was the most satisfying sound she had ever heard. She didn't look back. She was leaving the Hamilton name, the Hamilton house, and the entire hollow charade behind. And she was taking their future with her. The next morning, the offices of Albright and Finch felt like a different universe from the oppressive luxury of the Hamilton estate. Located in a sleek glass tower in downtown Manhattan, the space was minimalist and modern, filled with light and the quiet hum of purpose. Evelyn sat in a leather chair opposite a large mahogany desk, a cup of black coffee in her hand. Across from her sat Eleanor Albright, a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that had made her one of the most feared and respected corporate litigators in New York. She wore a perfectly tailored gray suit, her silver hair cut in a severe, stylish bob. "He filmed it?" Albright asked, her voice devoid of surprise but laced with a fine thread of contempt. "Classy. That will be useful later, should we need to demonstrate malice." "I don't think we'll need to," Evelyn said calmly. "The documents should be enough." Albright nodded, tapping a finger on a thick binder that lay open on her desk. The binder was labeled Project Helios. "Everything is in place, just as we planned. The transfer of administrative control for Holdings was initiated the moment you confirmed you had left the residence. By the time they discover the IT glitch, you will be the sole and undisputed authority." Evelyn had met Albright over a year ago at a university fundraising gala. While Marcus was busy networking with old money dinosaurs, Evelyn had struck up a conversation with a lawyer, who was immediately impressed by Evelyn's sharp grasp of financial law and market dynamics. That conversation had turned into a clandestine lunch, and then another. It was Albright who, after hearing the details of Evelyn's contributions to Hamilton Corp., had first uttered the phrase, "My dear, you're not a wife. You're their single most valuable and unprotected asset." The plan had been born from that realization. 6 months prior, when Hamilton Corp was looking to acquire a small but revolutionary AI startup, Evelyn had taken the lead. She told Marcus and her father-in-law that handling the complex international paperwork was tedious and would be a distraction for them. They had readily agreed, happy to offload the grunt work. With Albright's guidance, Evelyn had structured the entire acquisition not through Hamilton Corp directly, but through a multi-layered series of shell corporations. The final entity, the one that held every patent, every algorithm, and all the intellectual property of the newly christened Helios Innovations, was a Delaware corporation named Holdings. "Their arrogance was the key," Albright said, echoing Evelyn's thoughts. "Marcus signed every document you put in front of him. The power of attorney for the holding company, the transfer of ownership deeds for the patents. Did he read a single word?" "He told me he was too busy with big-picture strategy to get bogged down in the fine print," Evelyn replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "He assumed, as they always have, that my work was simply an extension of his will." Holdings. Evelyn Reed Miller. Her maiden name. A name the Hamiltons had tried so hard to erase, now the legal owner of their company's future. The beauty of the plan was its absolute legality. There was no fraud, no theft. It was a simple, elegant transfer of assets, signed and authorized by the CEO of Hamilton Corp's tech division himself, Marcus Hamilton. "So what happens now?" Evelyn asked. "Now they scramble," Albright said, a glint in her eye. "Their IT department will hit a wall of firewalls they can't breach. Their legal team will start digging and find the paper trail. It will lead them here to me. By then, your initial offer to their primary competitor will already be on the table. We're not just taking the asset, Evelyn. We are controlling the narrative and the market's reaction to its transfer." Albright closed the binder. "You were right to prepare for the worst. They didn't just want to divorce you. They wanted to humiliate you, to break you. They're about to learn what a grave miscalculation that was." Evelyn felt a sense of calm settle over her. This wasn't just revenge. It was a reckoning. It was the reclamation of her own identity and intellect. She had spent 5 years in a gilded cage, and now she was about to show her captors that she hadn't been idly preening her feathers. She had been sharpening her claws. While Marcus Hamilton was dismissing his first taste of defeat, Evelyn was stepping into her future. Her new home was a corner condo on the 47th floor of a new, impossibly sleek skyscraper in Hudson Yards. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city, the endless river of lights a stark contrast to the cloistered darkness of Greenwich. The space was the antithesis of the Hamilton mansion. It was minimalist, functional, and entirely her own. The furniture was modern and clean-lined. There were no ancestral portraits, no dusty heirlooms. The only art on the walls was a single, large abstract painting, a chaotic but beautiful swirl of blues, grays, and a defiant slash of gold. This wasn't just an apartment. It was a command center. A state-of-the-art computer with 3 monitors sat on a simple steel desk. The coffee table was covered not with decorative books, but with market reports and financial statements. For the first time in 5 years, Evelyn felt like she could breathe. She had spent the day in a series of quiet, efficient actions. She'd informed her bank of her new address and legal status. She had engaged a top-tier public relations firm, preparing them for the story that was about to break. Every move was calculated, a chess piece being positioned for the checkmate to come. She stood by the window, looking down at the pulsating city below. For so long her world had been defined by the Hamiltons, their expectations, their rules, their name. She had played the part of the perfect wife, burying her own ambition and intellect beneath a veneer of supportive grace. They had seen her silence as contentment, her competence as a useful tool for their own advancement. They had never once stopped to consider that the quiet, observant woman in their midst was also learning, planning, and waiting. Her new phone, a sleek, anonymous burner, buzzed on the kitchen counter. She picked it up. It was a text from her lawyer, Ms. Albright. "They're locked out. The first tremors have begun." A slow, genuine smile spread across Evelyn's face. It was a smile of grim satisfaction, of power reclaimed. This wasn't just about money or a company. It was about taking back the credit for her own mind, her own work. She scrolled to a number in her contacts, the direct line for Kenji Tanaka, the CEO of Omnitech, Hamilton Corp's most aggressive and innovative rival. She had laid the groundwork with him months ago, speaking in hypotheticals about a unique acquisition opportunity that might soon become available. Now it was time to make it real. She pressed the call button and held the phone to her ear. It rang twice before he picked up. "Tanaka." His voice was sharp, impatient. "Mr. Tanaka," Evelyn said, her own voice cool and steady, radiating an authority that would have been unrecognizable to the Hamiltons. "This is Evelyn Reed. We spoke a few months ago. I'm calling to inform you that the asset is secure, and I am unencumbered." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Through the window, the city lights glittered like a million conquered diamonds. "My offer is on the table." Marcus Hamilton woke the next morning with a mild headache from the celebratory scotch and a simmering annoyance. The access issue was a loose thread in the perfect tapestry of his victory, and he intended to snip it. He bypassed his usual breakfast routine and strode directly into his home office, dialing the head of Hamilton Corp's IT department, a man named Gary, before he'd even had a sip of coffee. "Gary Marcus Hamilton. I was locked out of the Helios portals last night. All of them." "Fix it," he said, foregoing any pleasantries. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Hamilton, good morning." "Yes, sir, we're aware of the issue. We've been getting flags from the system since around midnight. My team has been trying to get through the firewalls ever since." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean, trying? You built the damn things. Just override them." "That's the problem, sir," Gary said, his voice tight with stress. "We didn't build these. The entire security architecture for Helios was replaced. It's a fortress. It's not just denying our credentials. It's acting like we're a foreign entity. It doesn't recognize Hamilton Corp as having any administrative privileges at all. The annoyance in Marcus's gut curdled into a knot of unease. What are you talking about? That's impossible. Who would have the authority to do that? That's what we've been trying to figure out. We've been running diagnostics for hours. The ownership registry, the very core code of the system, was legally transferred to a parent company. It was authorized with the highest level of executive sign-off. Whose sign-off? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. Gary's voice dropped to a near whisper. Yours, sir. The transfer was authorized using your digital signature key 2 weeks ago. The blood drained from Marcus's face. He sank into his leather chair, the phone feeling slick in his suddenly sweaty palm. He remembered the pile of documents Evelyn had given him. Just a few final server hosting agreements, darling, she had said, her smile as placid and reassuring as ever. He had signed them without a second thought while taking a phone call. Find out who this parent company is, Gary, Marcus said, his voice now a low growl. I don't care what it takes. Hack it, break it, I want an answer. Now. He hung up and stared at the blank screen of his laptop. For the first time, Evelyn's calm demeanor at the restaurant didn't seem like shock. Felt like something else. Something cold and terrifyingly deliberate. An hour later, Gary called back. He sounded like a man who had just seen a ghost. Sir, he began, his voice trembling slightly. We managed to trace the registration of the parent company through the public domain records for the state of Delaware. We can't get inside the system, but we found out who owns it. Who? Marcus bit out, dread coiling in his stomach. Sir, this isn't a glitch. It's not a system error, Gary said. His voice filled with a sense of utter defeat. We haven't just been locked out. It's like we've been evicted. The system's new legal owner is a corporation I've never heard of. He took a shaky breath. It's called Holdings. The Fairlawn Country Club was Catherine Hamilton's sanctuary and her battlefield. It was a place where fortunes were discussed in hushed tones over Arnold Palmers, and alliances were forged and broken between the cheese course and the dessert trolley. That afternoon, during her weekly bridge luncheon, the air was thick with a tension she couldn't quite place. The greetings were a little too bright, the smiles a little too wide. She was seated at her usual table with 3 other women who, like her, were matriarchs of powerful families. They were her friends, in the way that sharks swimming in the same waters are friends. Catherine, darling, we were so sorry to hear about Evelyn, said Beatrice Vance, a woman whose husband ran a rival private equity firm. Her voice dripped with a syrupy, insincere sympathy. Such a shame when these things happen. Especially for the children. We have no children, Catherine replied coolly, arranging her cards in a perfect fan. And it was for the best. A mutual decision. Of course, Beatrice said, sharing a knowing glance with the other women. Still, it must be a difficult time. My Gerald was just saying the other day. He heard the most peculiar rumor about some instability with your new tech venture. Helios, is it? He said some of the bankers were getting nervous. Catherine's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression as serene as a frozen lake. Gerald must be mistaken. Business has never been better. Helios is poised to double our company's valuation. Oh, I do hope so, Beatrice purred, laying down a card. One hates to see a legacy family stumble. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Tumble. The Hamiltons did not stumble. For the rest of the afternoon, Catherine felt a palpable shift in the club's atmosphere. People would stop talking when she approached. She saw the glances, the whispered asides. Her social currency, built over decades of ruthless maneuvering and displays of impeccable wealth, was suddenly in question. These people didn't care about her family. They smelled blood in the water. When she was leaving, her driver holding the door of the Bentley, she saw Beatrice talking animatedly with another woman. They both glanced in her direction, their faces a mixture of pity and something that looked disturbingly like glee. Driving home, the carefully constructed walls of Catherine's world felt fragile for the first time. The whispers weren't just about a messy divorce anymore. Beatrice's husband was no fool. If he had heard something from his bankers, it was real. Her son's reassurances that everything was fine, that Evelyn was handled, now seemed laughably naive. She clutched her handbag, her knuckles white. An overwhelming sense of dread began to seep into her bones. She had orchestrated Evelyn's removal to protect the family. What if, in her arrogance, she had just armed the enemy who would bring it all down? The emergency meeting was held in the main boardroom on the top floor of Hamilton Tower. The vast, polished table reflected the grim faces of the people gathered around it. Marcus, his father Richard Hamilton, the family patriarch, a formidable man in his 70s with a mane of white hair and cold, calculating eyes, and a half-dozen of their most expensive corporate lawyers. The mood was funereal. Spread across the table were stacks of documents, the physical evidence of their colossal blunder. "It's ironclad," said lead counsel, a man named Peterson, adjusting his glasses. "We've been over every page." Marcus, with full executive authority, legally signed over all proprietary rights, patents, and operational control of the Helios project to a series of holding companies, the ultimate owner of which is, as we now know, Holdings. Richard Hamilton picked up one of the documents, his jaw tight with fury. Marcus's looping signature was scrawled at the bottom. "You didn't read these?" he asked his son, his voice dangerously low. She said they were server agreements," Marcus stammered, looking pale and sick. "Tax formalities. I was busy. I trusted her." "You trusted her." Richard slammed the document down on the table, making everyone jump. "You trusted a woman our family was in the process of discarding to handle the paperwork for the single most important asset we have? Did you think she was a fool?" Before Marcus could answer, a young, tech-savvy associate from the legal team cleared his throat. "Sirs, I think I have something. We've been digging into the public registration data for Holdings." All eyes turned to him. "It's a shell, of course. Registered in Delaware. Designed for maximum anonymity. But even shells have to have a registered agent. A legal point of contact." He slid his laptop to the center of the table and turned it around. On the screen was the corporate filing from the Delaware Secretary of State. Under the section labeled Registered Agent, there was a name. Evelyn Reed Miller. Miller. Her maiden name. A name Marcus hadn't even thought about in 5 years. The room fell into a dead, profound silence. The name on the screen was an indictment. It was the signature on their corporate death warrant. It wasn't just a hostile takeover by a competitor. This was a deeply personal, meticulously planned act of betrayal from within. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. The quiet, accommodating woman he had mocked and dismissed had just performed a feat of corporate jiu-jitsu so brilliant and so devastating that it had brought his entire family to its knees. He looked at his father, whose face had turned a worrying shade of purple. The whispers at the country club, the lockout, the smirks on the faces of their rivals, it all coalesced into a single horrifying truth. They hadn't just divorced Evelyn. They had unleashed her. In her sleek, sunlit condo, Evelyn was in her element. She sat at her desk, facing the 3 large monitors that displayed a secure video conference link. On the screen were the faces of Kenji Tanaka, the legendary CEO of Omnitech, and his executive board. There was no trace of the subdued, accommodating wife she had once played. Here, Evelyn was confident, articulate, and utterly in command. "As you can see from the data packets I sent over this morning," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Helios isn't just an AI. It's a predictive analytics engine capable of processing market data at speeds 5 times faster than anything currently in use. Hamilton Corp was planning to use it to dominate the commodities market. But its applications in your sector, in logistics, in consumer behavior analysis, are exponentially more profitable." She clicked a key, and a new set of charts appeared on their screens. "These are my projections. Implementing Helios into the Omnitech ecosystem wouldn't just increase your efficiency by an estimated 40%. It would effectively render Hamilton Corp's primary trading strategies obsolete. You wouldn't just be buying an asset. You'd be kneecapping your biggest competitor. Tanaka, a man known for his impassive expression, allowed a flicker of admiration to show. Your strategy is aggressive, Ms. Reed. My strategy is thorough, Evelyn corrected him gently. I was the architect of the Helios project from its inception. I know its every strength and every weakness. Which brings me to the second part of my proposal. She leaned forward slightly. The sale of Holdings and all its assets for the price we discussed. And a 1-year consulting contract for myself to personally oversee the integration of Helios into your systems. I am the only one who can ensure a seamless transition and unlock its full potential. My compensation will be a combination of a consulting fee and stock options. It was a masterful move. She wasn't just selling them a company. She was selling them the indispensable expertise required to make it work, tying her future success to theirs. One of the Omnitech board members spoke up. This is a hostile maneuver, Ms. Reed. The Hamiltons will fight this in court for years. No, they won't, Evelyn said with absolute certainty. My legal team, led by Eleanor Albright, has confirmed the transfer of ownership is legally unassailable. Any court case would only result in public discovery, during which it would become clear that their own son signed everything away. They will not risk that level of public humiliation. Kenji Tanaka was silent for a long moment, studying her through the screen. He saw not a vengeful ex-wife, but a brilliant strategist offering him an unprecedented opportunity on a silver platter. Prepare the acquisition papers, Tanaka said to his team. His eyes still locked on Evelyn. And draw up Ms. Reed's consulting contract. Send out a press release. I want this announced before the markets open tomorrow. He then looked directly at Evelyn and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Welcome to Omnitech, Ms. Reed. The call ended. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, a wave of exhilaration washing over her. The first phase was complete. The storm was no longer gathering. It was about to break. The news broke just before dawn. It didn't come as a whisper. It came as a thunderclap. Every major financial news network led with it. Omnitech announces acquisition of Helios Innovations in stunning corporate coup. Hamilton Corp's crown jewel sold out from under them. Marcus saw it on the television in his father's study, where he, his father, and his mother had been holding a grim, sleepless vigil. The headline was superimposed over a picture of Kenji Tanaka shaking hands with a smiling, confident woman. It was Evelyn. His world tilted on its axis. The sight of her poised and triumphant, next to their greatest rival, was like a physical blow. His phone began to ring, a frantic, incessant buzzing. Board members, investors, reporters. His father was already on the line, shouting at their legal team, his face apoplectic. His mother sat in a high-backed chair, utterly silent, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. All the arrogance, all the smug satisfaction, evaporated from Marcus, replaced by a black hole of pure panic. This was real. This was happening. It wasn't a problem to be solved. It was a catastrophe that had already occurred. Ignoring the frantic advice of the lawyers, ignoring the furious glare of his father, he fled the room. He needed to talk to her. He had to fix this. He ran to his office, his hands trembling as he found her number in his contacts and hit dial. It went straight to voicemail. He started talking, the words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent torrent. Evelyn, it's me. I saw the news. This is insane. This is a joke, right? Some kind of crazy, elaborate joke to teach me a lesson. Okay, fine, lesson learned. You're brilliant, you're smarter than me, I admit it. But you can't do this. You can't just give it to Tanaka. That's our company, our legacy. It's my father's legacy. He paced the room, his voice cracking. Please just call me. We can undo this. I'll do anything. I'll tear up the divorce papers. We can go back to how things were. Remember that trip to Italy. Remember how happy we were. This isn't you. That woman on the TV, that's not the woman I married. He paused, his desperation morphing into a pathetic, pleading whimper. "Please, Evelyn. Don't do this to us. Don't do this to me." He finally ended the call, his breathing ragged. He stood in the silent office, waiting, hoping, praying his phone would ring. Miles away, in her condo high above the city, Evelyn stood by the window as the first rays of sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her phone was on the counter, the voicemail from Marcus playing on speaker. She listened to the entire pathetic monologue, from the blustering denial to the desperate pleas. His voice, once a tool of casual condescension, was now the sound of a man utterly broken. She felt nothing. No pity, no anger, not even satisfaction. It was simply data. The final confirmation of a hypothesis she had formed years ago, that his love was a currency, traded only for her compliance and utility. When the message ended, the silence in the room was absolute. She picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the icon of Marcus's name. With a single, decisive tap, she pressed delete. She took a sip of the green tea she had just brewed. It was warm and clean, tasted like a new beginning. The new issue of Forbes hit the newsstands on a Tuesday, and it landed with the force of a bomb. There was no escaping it. On every corner in Manhattan, in every airport lounge and boardroom lobby, the cover was a stark, powerful image of Evelyn Reed. She wasn't smiling. She was looking directly into the camera, her expression one of cool intelligence and unshakable resolve. The headline, in bold white letters, was a declaration of war. The woman who outplayed an empire. The Evelyn Reed story. The article itself was a masterpiece of narrative assassination. It wasn't just a business story. It was a deeply personal, meticulously researched profile that repositioned Evelyn from a discarded socialite to a wronged corporate genius. Catherine Hamilton first saw it at the country club. It had been left, as if by accident, on the polished table in the ladies' lounge, open to the cover. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Evelyn Reed, the Wharton MBA who masterminded the acquisition of Helios Innovations, was for 5 years the secret weapon of Hamilton Corp., the article began. While her husband, Marcus Hamilton, was celebrated as the public face of the company's modernization, sources close to the family describe Reed as the true architect of its most profitable strategies. The story was filled with damning, anonymous quotes from former Hamilton Corp executives and board members, people who had watched Evelyn's brilliance get credited to her husband for years. Marcus was great at a cocktail party, one source was quoted as saying, but in a strategy session, he would just echo whatever Evelyn had told him that morning. We all knew who the real brains of the operation was. Marcus saw it on his tablet, the article sent to him by a dozen different gleeful friends. He scrolled through it, a nauseous feeling growing in his stomach. The piece painted him as a lazy, entitled fool, a dilettante who owed his success to the wife he had publicly humiliated. It even referenced the divorce, framing it with brutal clarity. The end of their marriage was as swift as it was cruel, the article continued. Sources say Reed was presented with divorce papers at her own 30th birthday dinner, an event orchestrated by her mother-in-law, Catherine Hamilton. Reed's quiet dignity in that moment, however, belied the corporate checkmate she had already put in motion. She didn't just walk away from a marriage. She walked away with the company's future. The public narrative, once controlled and curated by the Hamiltons' expensive PR firms for decades, had been stolen from them in a single day. The story was irresistible. A brilliant woman, underestimated and betrayed, rising up to claim what was rightfully hers. Evelyn was David, and the Hamiltons were the fallen, oafish Goliath. By the end of the day, #Evelyn Reed was trending on social media. She was no longer a Hamilton. She was a brand of her own, forged in the fire of their arrogance. For the Hamiltons, the humiliation was absolute, public, and permanent. The fallout from the Forbes article turned the Hamilton mansion into a pressure cooker. The carefully maintained facade of familial unity cracked, then shattered, revealing the bitter resentments that had festered beneath the surface for years. The final, explosive confrontation happened in Richard Hamilton's cavernous, wood-paneled study. A laughingstock, Richard roared, throwing the magazine onto his desk. It slid across the polished surface and hit the floor with a loud slap. You two have made this family a public laughingstock. Catherine, who had been staring out the window, her posture rigid, spun around. Her fear had curdled into a venomous rage, and she directed it all at her son. This is his fault. I told you he was weak from the beginning. Letting that woman wrap him around her little finger. Letting her handle the most important transaction in this company's history. You are a fool, Marcus. An incompetent fool. Marcus, who had been silently absorbing his father's fury, finally snapped. The years of being treated as a disappointment by his father and a puppet by his mother boiled over. My fault, he screamed, his face red. My fault. You were the one who wanted her gone. You couldn't stand that she was smarter than you, that she didn't worship the ground you walk on. She's not one of us, Marcus. She has to go. That's what you said every day for a year. I was protecting our family from a social climbing schemer. Catherine shrieked. She wasn't a schemer, she was a genius. Marcus shot back, the truth finally erupting from him in a raw, desperate confession. And yes, she was smarter than me. She was smarter than all of us. And it drove you crazy. It intimidated me. I couldn't keep up, so I let her do the work. And I took the credit because it was easier than admitting my wife was better at my own damn job than I was. He turned to his father, his eyes wild with a pain that had been years in the making. You wanted an heir, a killer. But I'm not you. I was never going to be you. And the one person who could have actually secured our legacy, the one person who had the brains to do it, we threw her out. We humiliated her. What did you think she would do? Richard Hamilton looked at his son and wife. His face a mask of pure, undiluted disgust. The dynasty he had spent his entire life building was being torn apart not by a rival or a market crash, but by the petty jealousies and pathetic insecurities of his own family. Enough, he said, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet tone. Both of you. This is not about who is to blame anymore. This is about survival. He looked from his weeping, hysterical wife to his broken, shouting son. You have not just risked our fortune. You have destroyed our name. All for nothing. The unity of the Hamilton clan was a myth. In the face of a true crisis, they had done the one thing their enemies could have hoped for. They had turned on each other. 2 days later, the reputational crisis became a full-blown financial catastrophe. Richard and Marcus Hamilton were summoned to the headquarters of their primary lender, a powerful investment bank that had financed the family's ambitions for half a century. They were shown into a conference room, not the plush senior partner's office they were used to. The bankers, men who had once fawned over them at galas and golf tournaments, were now cold, clinical, and utterly devoid of sympathy. Richard Marcus, began the bank's president, a man named Henderson, gesturing for them to sit. There's no easy way to say this. As you know, a significant portion of your family's personal and corporate debt is secured by your controlling shares in Hamilton Corporation. Richard nodded grimly. It's a standard arrangement. It is, Henderson agreed. An arrangement predicated on the stock maintaining a certain value. In the last 48 hours, following the news of the Helios sale and the subsequent public narrative, Hamilton Corp stock has fallen by 63%. He slid a tablet across the table. A graph showed a red line plummeting off a cliff. The market has lost confidence, Henderson continued, his voice flat. The loss of Helios has wiped out your projected 5-year earnings growth. Your current stock value is no longer sufficient to collateralize your loans. As per our agreement, the bank is issuing a margin call. The words landed in the silent room with the force of a physical impact. Margin call. The ultimate nightmare of any leveraged investor. How much? Richard asked, his voice hoarse. $250 million, Henderson replied without blinking. You have until the end of business on Friday to deposit that amount in cash or equivalent liquid assets into your account. If you fail to do so, We will have no choice but to begin liquidating your collateral to cover the debt. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. Liquidating their collateral. That meant the bank would seize their shares, their controlling shares, in Hamilton Corp and sell them on the open market. It meant they would lose the company their grandfather had founded. They would lose everything. We'll need an extension, Marcus said, his voice weak. Henderson shook his head. I'm sorry, Marcus. Our risk management committee is adamant. The position is too volatile. 72 hours. As they walked out of the bank building and onto the bustling street, Richard Hamilton looked older and more fragile than Marcus had ever seen him. The swagger was gone, replaced by the stooped shoulders of a defeated man. They had thought their wealth made them invincible. But their empire was a house of cards, and Evelyn had just pulled out the one card that made it all fall down. The 72-hour deadline was a ticking time bomb, and Marcus was coming apart at the seams. He was a ghost in his own home, ignored by his father, who was locked in frantic, fruitless calls with potential investors, and his mother, who had retreated into a state of stunned, bitter silence. He started drinking early in the day, the expensive scotch in his study offering the only solace he could find. Late on Thursday night, with less than 24 hours to go, a drunken, desperate idea formed in his mind. He had to see Evelyn. He had to make her understand. This wasn't a corporate maneuver. It was the annihilation of his entire world. He paid a private investigator an exorbitant fee for her new address, the information arriving in a text message that felt like a holy grail. He took a taxi, the bottle of Macallan in a paper bag on the seat beside him. He stumbled out in front of her building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to mock the crumbling ruins of his life. He strode into the lobby, his clothes disheveled, his eyes wild. The doorman, a tall, imposing man in a crisp uniform, stepped in front of him. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Evelyn Reed," Marcus slurred, trying to push past him. "Is she expecting you?" the doorman asked, his tone polite but firm. "Just tell her Marcus is here. She'll see me." The doorman spoke quietly into a receiver on his collar. After a moment, he looked back at Marcus, his expression impassive. "I'm sorry, sir. Ms. Reed is not accepting visitors." "What?" "No, that's a mistake," Marcus stammered, his desperation rising. He raised his voice. "Evelyn, I know you can hear me. We need to talk. Please." High above, in her silent apartment, Evelyn watched the scene unfold on the lobby's security feed displayed on her tablet. She saw Marcus, a pathetic, drunken mess, pleading with the doorman. She saw the man she had once loved, the man she had built a life with, reduced to a public spectacle. There was no flicker of pity in her eyes, no residual affection. She felt only a profound and final sense of detachment. He was a stranger making a scene in her lobby. She pressed the intercom button connecting her to the front desk. "Frank," she said, her voice perfectly calm. "That man is trespassing. Please call security and have him removed from the premises. If he refuses to leave, inform him you will call the police." "Yes, Ms. Reed," the doorman replied. Evelyn turned off the monitor. She walked to her window and looked out at the lights of the city that was now hers. Down below, Marcus was being escorted out of the building, his shouts echoing faintly before being swallowed by the sounds of the street. It was the last time she would ever see him. He was no longer her husband, no longer her problem. He was just a ghost from a life she had already left behind. With the deadline just hours away, a frantic Catherine Hamilton made her final move. They had managed to scrape together nearly $100 million by liquidating every minor stock, bond, and piece of art they could sell quickly, but they were still disastrously short. There was only one major asset left that was solely in her name, free from the corporate chaos. A magnificent full-floor penthouse on Park Avenue, inherited from her own parents. It was worth at least $100 million on its own, likely more. "Sell it," she commanded her personal real estate broker over the phone. "I don't care about the price. No inspections, no negotiations. Find a cash buyer and close it today." I'll pay whatever commission you want. The broker, sensing the desperation and the size of the potential payday, promised to work miracles. For 2 agonizing hours, Catherine paced her drawing room, clinging to this last shred of hope. This penthouse was her crown jewel, her ultimate symbol of blue-blooded status. Selling it was a humiliation, but it was better than total ruin. Finally, the broker called back. But his voice, usually so smooth and confident, was hesitant and strained. "Catherine, we have a problem. A very serious one." "What is it?" she demanded. "Did you find a buyer?" "The buyer isn't the issue. Have 3 cash offers already. The problem is the title search. We can't sell the property. There's a lien against it." Catherine froze. "What? That's impossible. It's owned free and clear." "Not according to the city registrar," the broker said grimly. "A uniform commercial code lien was filed against the property 3 weeks ago. It's for $2 million, plus interest and legal fees." "For what? From who?" Catherine cried, her mind reeling. The broker took a deep breath. "The lien was filed by a creditor to cover a defaulted business loan for which you were the primary guarantor. The loan was for a company called Catherine's Closet, a boutique you opened in Soho about 4 years ago." The memory hit Catherine like a physical blow. The Vanity Project, a high-fashion boutique she had started and quickly grown bored with. It had failed spectacularly. She had forgotten all about the lingering debt, assuming her accountants had handled it. And the creditor, the one who filed the lien? Catherine whispered, already knowing the answer. "According to the paperwork," the broker said, his voice heavy with disbelief, "the debt was purchased from the original lender by a private holding company. The lien was filed by that company. It's called ERM Holdings." The phone slipped from Catherine's numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. It was the final brutal checkmate. A $2 million debt from a failed vanity project she had forced Evelyn to co-sign on as a formality years ago. A loose thread she had never bothered to snip. Evelyn hadn't just taken their future. She had meticulously weaponized their past. The penthouse, the one asset that could have saved them, was now legally entangled in a web of Evelyn's own making, rendering it useless. The time bomb had hit zero. Their empire was gone. The auction was held in the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis, a space usually reserved for lavish weddings and corporate galas. Today it was a corporate morgue. The assets of the bankrupt Hamilton Corporation were being sold off, piece by piece, under the cold, fluorescent lights. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and opportunism. Vultures, dressed in expensive suits, had gathered for the feast. Evelyn sat in the back row, a ghost at the funeral. She wore simple black trousers and a silk blouse, her hair pulled back, a pair of non-prescription glasses serving as a mild disguise. She wasn't here to bid. She was here to bear witness, to see the final chapter of the Hamilton Empire written in the indifferent language of lot numbers and gavel strikes. She watched as the company was dismembered. Lot 101, the fleet of corporate town cars, sold for a fraction of their value to a rival firm. Lot 214, the patent portfolio for a subsidiary in logistics, now the property of a German conglomerate. Lot 305, the corporate headquarters itself, the gleaming Hamilton Tower on Park Avenue, its name soon to be stripped from the facade by its new owners. Across the cavernous room, she could see them. The Hamiltons. They were huddled together in the front row, a legal necessity for the proceedings, looking like shipwreck survivors clinging to a piece of driftwood. Richard was a stooped, grey shadow of the titan he once was. Marcus stared blankly ahead, his face puffy and pale. And Catherine. Catherine looked utterly destroyed. Her regal posture was gone, replaced by a brittle fragility. The diamonds were gone, the couture replaced by a simple, ill-fitting dress. They were surrounded by lawyers, but utterly alone. For a moment, Evelyn felt a flicker of something, a phantom limb of an emotion she could no longer access. It wasn't pity. It wasn't triumph. It was just a profound and desolate sense of finality. This was the mathematical endpoint of their cruelty and arrogance. As the auctioneer announced the sale of the Hamiltons' art collection, the very paintings that had once hung in the mansion's formal living room, Catherine looked up, her gaze sweeping across the room in a daze. Her eyes, vacant and lost, met Evelyn's. There was a split second of recognition. Catherine's mouth opened slightly. The color drained from her already ashen face. She saw not the quiet, compliant girl she had banished, but the architect of her ruin, sitting calmly at the wake. Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply held Catherine's gaze for a long, silent moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod that was neither forgiving nor cruel but simply an acknowledgement of the end, she turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the ghosts of the Hamilton dynasty to the drone of the auctioneer's voice and the picking of their bones. A week after the auction, Evelyn was leaving the Omnitech building, heading for a taxi. The afternoon sun was warm, and the sounds of the city were a familiar, comforting hum. "Evelyn!" The voice was quiet, hesitant, but she recognized it instantly. She stopped and turned. It was Marcus. He stood a few feet away, looking like a stranger. He was thinner, his expensive suit replaced by a simple, off-the-rack blazer that didn't quite fit his shoulders. He wasn't drunk or angry. He just looked empty. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice even. She wasn't afraid. There was nothing left between them to fear. "I just have to ask one thing," he said, taking a tentative step closer. "I know what I did. What we did. Get that. But this? The complete annihilation. Why?" Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time, she saw him not as a monster or a husband, but as a weak, sad man. She owed him nothing, but she decided to give him the truth. It was the last thing she would ever give him. "You think this was about Helios?" she said, her voice devoid of heat. "You think it was about the money?" "Never was. It was about 1,000 tiny cuts, Marcus. It was about you crediting my reports as your own. It was your mother suggesting. I quit my job after we got married so I could focus on your needs. It was about being told the formal living room was a place we didn't get comfortable in." She took a step closer, her own voice dropping. "But if you want a single moment, if you need one reason why, I'll give it to you. My 30th birthday. You sat there silent, while your mother handed me divorce papers as a gift. And you took out your phone." Marcus flinched, the memory a visible blow. "You filmed me," she continued, her voice precise and devastating. "You recorded what you thought would be my humiliation, for your own entertainment. In that moment I realized you didn't see me as a partner or a wife or even a human being. You saw me as an accessory you were tired of, a thing to be discarded and mocked. You saw my pain as a sport." She paused, letting the words settle in the space between them. "This wasn't revenge, Marcus. This was a consequence. I didn't destroy your family. I just stopped holding it up. I took back what was mine, my work, my name, my story. And you were all left with was the truth of what you are." He had no answer. There was nothing to say. The truth was stark and undeniable. He stared at her, the woman he never really knew, and saw the full depth of his mistake. "Goodbye, Marcus," Evelyn said softly. She turned, hailed a cab that had just pulled up to the curb, and got in without a backward glance, leaving him standing alone on the sidewalk with nothing but the ruins of a life he had so carelessly broken. 6 months later, the Hamilton name was a whisper, a cautionary tale told in the hushed corners of country clubs and boardrooms. Their new reality was a quiet, suburban purgatory. The Greenwich mansion, with its cold marble foyer and manicured lawns, had been sold to a tech billionaire who promptly gutted it. Richard, Catherine, and Marcus now lived in a mortgaged Tudor-style house in a respectable but unremarkable Westchester suburb. The house was large by normal standards, but to them it felt like a shoebox, each of its rooms a constant reminder of the palaces they had lost. Richard Hamilton, the patriarch, was a recluse. His health had declined rapidly after the collapse, and he spent most of his days in his study, not making deals, but staring blankly at the walls, his legacy reduced to ash. He rarely spoke to his wife or son. There was nothing left but blame, and blame was exhausting. Catherine's fall was perhaps the most complete. Her social world had evaporated. The invitations stopped coming. Her calls went unanswered. The friends who had once clamored for her favor now crossed the street to avoid her. Stripped of her wealth and status, she was just a bitter, elegantly dressed woman in a grocery store, invisible to the world she had once ruled. Her days were long and empty, filled with a silence that was heavier than any judgment. And Marcus worked. He'd been given a mid-level marketing job at a company run by a former classmate, an act of pity that chafed him every single day. He commuted by train. He sat in a cubicle. He took orders from people half as smart as Evelyn. Every day was a monument to his failure. He no longer drank. The clarity of sobriety was its own kind of punishment. He would sometimes see Evelyn's face on the cover of a magazine in a newsstand or on a financial news program on TV. She was thriving, a star in a universe he could no longer access. In those moments, he would feel the phantom limb of his old life ache with a regret so profound it was a physical pain. They hadn't just lost their money. They had lost their future, and were now condemned to live out their days in the quiet, gray prison of their past mistakes. Evelyn's world, by contrast, was expanding. It was vibrant, challenging, and joyfully, completely her own. At Omnitech, she wasn't just a consultant. She had been made the chief strategy officer, a role Kenji Tanaka had created specifically for her. She stood at the head of a gleaming boardroom table, a schematic of a new global logistics network projected on the screen behind her. The room was filled with the company's brightest minds, and they were all listening to her, their attention rapt. By integrating the Helios predictive engine here, she explained, pointing to a key node in the network, we don't just react to supply chain disruptions, we anticipate them. We can reroute shipments before a storm even makes landfall. We'll be saving an estimated $200 million in the first year alone. Kenji Tanaka nodded from the other end of the table, a rare, genuine smile on his face. Brilliant, Evelyn. Absolutely brilliant. After the meeting, she walked with Tanaka back toward her office. You seem happy here, he observed. I am, she said, and the truth of it felt warm and real. I'm doing the work I love with people I respect. It's all I ever wanted. Her personal life had blossomed in tandem. The toxic glamour of the Hamilton social circle had been replaced by a smaller, more genuine group of friends. There was Eleanor Albright, her lawyer, who had become a trusted mentor. There were colleagues from Omnitech who saw her as a peer, not an accessory. Tonight, she was having dinner with one of them, a kind, fiercely intelligent architect named Julian who had designed Omnitech's new campus. He made her laugh, challenged her ideas, and listened when she spoke. His eyes focused on her as if what she was saying was the most important thing in the world. It was a feeling she was still getting used to. He had never once asked about her past life, only about her future. Later that evening, as they shared a bottle of wine at a quiet Italian restaurant, he reached across the table and briefly touched her hand. You know, he said, his smile gentle, you're even more impressive when you're not revolutionizing global commerce. Evelyn smiled back, a real, unpracticed smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of something new, something hopeful. She wasn't healing anymore. She was healed. The party was on the terrace of her new penthouse apartment, a stunning glass-walled space overlooking Central Park. It was, ironically, the very same apartment that Catherine had lost, which Evelyn, through a holding company, had quietly purchased out of foreclosure. She had redecorated it, erasing the last vestiges of the Hamiltons' ostentatious taste and replacing it with clean lines, modern art, and warm, inviting spaces. It was her 31st birthday. A year ago, she had been in a cold, silent restaurant, being handed the ashes of her marriage. Tonight, she was surrounded by the warmth of genuine affection and the buzz of happy conversation. Ms. Albright was there, deep in a debate with Kenji Tanaka. Her friends from the city were laughing by the railing. Julian was by her side. His presence a comforting warmth. The air was filled not with tension, but with jazz music. The champagne was not a weapon, but a celebration. Julian handed her a glass. "A toast," he said, his voice low and meant only for her. "To the woman who builds empires, not just topples them." Evelyn smiled and raised her glass, then clinked it against his. She looked at the faces of the people around her, at the glittering carpet of city lights spread out below, at the limitless expanse of the night sky above. She thought about the woman she was a year ago, quiet, suppressed, and simmering with a righteous, calculated anger. And she thought about the woman she was now, strong, free, and in control of her own story. The revenge had been a necessary fire, burning away the dead wood of her past. But it was not the fire she lived for. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice easily carrying over the gentle music. Everyone turned toward her. "A year ago," she began, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her friends, "I learned a valuable lesson. That sometimes, you have to tear everything down to find out what's truly worth building." She looked out at the skyline, at the endless points of light. "So this is not a toast to the past or to endings. It's a toast to new beginnings, to the future, and to the incredible, beautiful, and surprising things you can build when you're finally free." Everyone raised their glasses, their voices joining in a chorus of "To the future." Evelyn took a sip of champagne. Tasted like victory, yes, but more than that, it tasted like peace. She stood there, surrounded by light and laughter, the master of her own extraordinary life. The phoenix had not only risen, she had learned to fly. And that's how Evelyn built a new empire from the ashes of the one that tried to burn her. Now I have to ask you, was taking back her company enough, or was the total destruction of the Hamilton family the only way to get true justice? Let me know in the comments. Would you have shown them mercy,